special day. We're going to go interview the legendary, superlative Joseph Stein. He was on the writing staff of your show of shows, starring Sid Caesar, whose alumni include Carl Reiner, Mel Brooks. It's basically a who's who of some of the funniest minds of our era. He's one of the few people who has actually made a living writing books to musicals. It's such a lost art, and he's written some of the best ones. Zorba, Fiddler on the Roof, Enter Laughing. I've grown up with Joe's work. I was a son in my 6th grade production of Fiddler on the Roof. I still know the choreography. I hear they picked a bride for me. I hope, shrug, shrug, she's pretty. Turn. Fiddler's DNA is all over in the Heights. Almost every creative discussion about the structure of the show would come back to Fiddler. Fiddler was our blueprint. I'm thrilled to get to talk to him today. I want to talk to him about his writing process. I want to talk to him about his history, and I just want to see what we can glean from the great man himself.
Hey, Lynn, how are you?
How are you?
Good.
We enter laughing. So?
Now, this is my little abode, and this is where I work.
It is gorgeous.
Yes, well, it's not so gorgeous.
You got you've got quite a Hirschfeld collection here.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's Zorba.
Yeah.
Excellent. That's the Hirschfeld for Zorba. Here are the 27 Yankees, the all-star team.
The Sid Caesar gang.
The Sid Caesar gang.
This was when I was working on the show.
Uh-huh. There's Mel Brooks.
Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner.
And then who's over here?
These are all very close friends of some people I've worked with. Well, this is John Cantor, Stephen Schwartz, Sheldon Harnick. And most of them I like.
Well, that's good.
Actually, I like them all.
That's all you can ask for in the theater.
This is what I'm really proud of.
The Dramatists Guild of America, Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yeah.
I think I was there when you got that award last year. Right.
Yeah, very recently.
Yeah.
Well, it's a lifetime achievement. I didn't get it when I was a kid. The Oscar Hammerstein Award I'm rather pleased with. That was the one that the York Theatre gave me.
Wonderful.
These are the stars of Juno: Shirley Booth, Melvin Douglas.
Wow.
This was given to me by the theater that's running Plain and Fancy for the last 30 years.
Wow.
It's been running constantly for 30 years. I had no idea it was happening. When they called me and they said, we'd like you to go to our 10th anniversary of Plain and Fancy, I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. They called it the Joseph Stein Theater. So
you have a theater named after you in Indiana.
Yeah, yeah.
That's wonderful.
Well, it's a little theater. Well, it's not that big, but it's in Indiana, so who's to know? So these are the shows that I've done.
Oh, man.
And these are scripts I'm working on right now.
I see you have a little typewriter over there. I miss the sound. I used to write on typewriter too.
I loved working at a typewriter.
I feel like I edited more in my head when I would write for typewriter because I knew I couldn't.
You're absolutely right. I did a lot more editing first, and before I put it on paper.
Yeah.
But that's Fiddler in Japan.
Oh, this is the Fiddler in Japan. That is one of my favorite stories of yours, by the way, of the intermission at Fiddler in Japan.
Oh, yeah. Well, the producer said, do they understand this show in America? I said, why do you ask? He says, because it's so Japanese. And I was bewildered and thrilled.
That sums up everything about the universal appeal of Fiddler.
Of course, there were certain things they didn't quite understand. Like they had the rabbi walking and crossing himself. I said, you can't do that. But they did a brilliant production. This is the living room. There's not very much to show you that's of any great consequence. Oh, here's my Tony. And
it's of consequence.
And this is my wife.
There's your beautiful wife.
She's
beautiful on the cover of Life
She was a lovely actress, and she made the cover of Life magazine. the lyric that Sheldon Hardick wrote, and one staircase that goes nowhere, is that?
Yeah, it's there would be one long staircase just going up and one even longer going down and one more going nowhere just for show.
And this is the staircase that goes nowhere just to show.
Amazing.
I saw it in an auction room somewhere, and I said, my God, this is really a staircase that goes nowhere just to show. I want it. And there it is.
Amazing. Well, I told you this as soon as you came to see the show, that we stole everything that's good in our opening number, we stole from Fiddler.
Well, you're welcome. I recognize some of the similarities. I think you use it extremely well.
Well, but you know that Fiddler really was our blueprint on Heights, and every fight that Tommy Caitlin and I got into was about, well, in the opening of Fiddler they did this, and then we would dissect the opening of Fiddler, and we really used that as a blueprint in terms of the way that, as our blueprint for a successful musical book, and we owe that show in particular a great deal of debt.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm enormously complimented, enormously. Yeah. And I'll have my lawyer sue you in the morning.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I look forward to that subpoena.
No, really, I feel I'm very moved by that. Yeah. And I'm delighted. I saw your play, as you know, I saw it more than once. I saw it often. And I think it's a hell of a show, a wonderful show. And I'm delighted that I made some contribution to it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I don't know if you know this also, but I was a son in the 6th grade production up the street at 94th, which is the reason we're sitting here.
Lynn,
really.
I can kill myself that I didn't see that production.
I want to talk a bit about, before we start on your impressive biography and all of your accolades and your stairways going nowhere just for show, when you started writing, or when you started thinking of yourself as a writer?
Well, those are two separate questions.
Okay.
Because when I started writing, it was like maybe I was 3 years old.
Yeah.
You know, I sort of think I had a pencil or a crayon in my hand. I started writing. I really loved to write. But I did not think of myself as writing as a career until quite late, because basically this was during the Depression and we just had to make a living. So, and actually I stumbled into being a professional writer by pure accident.
How was that?
And one day a friend invited me to lunch with some other friends of his. One of us was a fellow named Zero Mostel, who at the time was doing a radio show. That week, he ran out of stuff. And that week, we were sitting at lunch, and he says, I don't know what to talk about. So we chatted about something, and I suggested whatever. And he said, hey, that sounds pretty funny. You want to write it out? And I did. And he paid me $15 a week. And I did it every week for the rest of his run. The original writer of the show, of the total show, asked me if I wanted to do another show that he was working on, and I became a professional writer.
Right, and did your parents write? Did they encourage this? Were they?
Well, my parents certainly didn't write, nor did they encourage it. They had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
I was pretty much on my own. They thought if you're making a living, fine. You know. So.
Right. And then, you went on to write, you're on the legendary All-Star team, the comedy equivalent of the 27 Yankees, your show of shows.
After that beginning, I kept writing various radio shows, the Henry Morgan Show and other shows, and increasingly I became quite well known in the New York writing community. And then I started writing television, and then they asked me to go on the show and shows, and that's like graduating magna cum laude. It was like a graduate school in comedy writing. It was, I think, for all of us. I think, and any one of the guys who were there would say that we had learned an enormous amount of comedy. And basically, because Sid's attitude towards comedy had total truth in it. Sid was not a joke writer or a joke teller. He would stumble over a joke. He couldn't tell it, but he was great on character, on relationships, on conflict, on things that were honestly true and human. And we all learned from that. He was, by instinct, a hell of a teacher.
What was your writing process during that?
First of all, we had to fill, I don't remember, it was an hour and a half or a 2-hour program, and it was live every week. You're not allowed to have writer's block.
Right, you've got.
I mean, you had to, you had to come up with something. I mean, there was a deadline. So we didn't, even though the concept of writer's block didn't occur to any of us, we just had to come up with material. And once you have that kind of training, you know that it is possible always to break through the writer's block.
Do you have a routine? Do you have like a time you set aside during the day when you like to write in particular, or?
Well, no.
Do you catch it as it comes?
Listen, I write what I feel like, what I have to. I really enjoy writing against the deadline, even if it's a mental deadline. It's in my own head.
I'm the same way. I need to say, you got to do it by Friday because you don't have any time.
But the best way is to make your own deadline.
Absolutely.
But as I say, when you start in radio or particularly in television, and particularly under that kind of pressure, you're comfortable with deadlines. It becomes part of the way you work.
How do you get from there to Plain and Fancy?
The Morris office was approached by a potential producer. He had never produced before, but he was eager to produce. He was a radio husband and wife team, and one of their clients was a very rich, expensive department store in Pennsylvania. Philadelphia, I think. And they said, I think they were jealous of Oklahoma.
Oh, really?
They wanted to have a play about Pennsylvania.
Exclamation points at the end.
Yeah, anything about Pennsylvania. And, when you think about Pennsylvania, it gets kind of boring, except for the Pennsylvania Dutch. And that was intriguing. And the idea of contrasting the culture of the Pennsylvania Dutch with a contemporary New York couple.
And what was that process like?
This was my very first Broadway experience. We had a producer, as I say, who had never produced before. He hired a director who had never directed on Broadway before.
Off to
He
a
had
good
done
start.
some stock stuff. He had a composer and lyricist who had never written for the musical theater. We were all novices, and my anticipation was that nothing would come of it. And to my amazement and my delight, the damn thing worked. I mean, it was a success. It was a success. It was an enormous success out of town because we opened in Philadelphia.
Right.
I mean, it was an enormous sellout. So, in general, from then on, I stayed in the theater. And by the way, it's the only place that a writer can be really in charge. Although I loved working on the Sid Caesar show, I wasn't in charge. Sid was.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about Fiddler. How did this start?
There's some short stories about a character named Tevye that my father used to read to me in Yiddish when I was growing up. And I didn't remember the stories at all, but I just remembered falling in love with them. I found something called Tevye's Daughters containing those stories that I had remembered when I was a child. And that was the genesis of Fiddler. I read them, and I thought that I fell in love with the community, with the atmosphere, with the central character, and I felt that I could weave a story out of that. Those.
How did you go about doing that? Because it's such that's one of the most amazingly sort of structured musicals. Even that opening number, when you have sort of the fiddler and the concentric circles as he introduces the community. How did you?
You mean the tradition?
How did you take these short stories and weave this story?
It's very hard to describe because it was not obvious. It was not technical. It's all emotional. And it's impulsive. There were 3 stories that intrigued me the most, and those are 3 of the 3 daughters. those three daughters. He had 6 or 7 daughters. But those three intrigued me, and I felt they all had something in common, not within the stories themselves, but if you're objective and you looked at them from a distance, they all were about the breaking of a tradition. They didn't say so. Each of the stories just were self-contained. They were also written as monologues. Those stories are all monologues, written by, it's Taviat telling the story to Shalom Aleichem.
And how did you decide what would be musicalized by Bach and Harnick, and what?
Well, we decided among the three of us. We talked about it. They came up with notions for songs. I think the first song that, after I did a rough outline of the script, a very rough outline, I included the dream as one aspect of the story, and that's the first thing they wrote.
Really?
Because it appealed to them.
Yeah.
They got excited about that idea, and they wrote it, and I said, I have no idea whether it'll be in or not, but I didn't know what would be in at that point. Right. Except I knew that I was going to follow that story. I mean, the structure that I was beginning to build. Despite the fact that we were all moderately successful, we could not get any producer interested in that project. It was the hardest thing in the world. Of all of the shows I've done, that was the most difficult to get a producer for was Fiddler. I remember one producer that says, I read it and I really like it. I like it very much. But what am I going to do for an audience once I run out of Hadassah benefits? So that was, and I thought they were probably right, but I didn't know that this would ever have an audience. None of us did. It was a very unique kind of thing for Broadway. It was not a song and dance kind of show.
And how much did it change between, because I know you guys had an out-of-town tryout.
Yes, we tried it in Detroit and then Washington.
Uh-huh. And how much did it change in those out-of-town tryouts before it got to New York? What were sort of the...
Well, when we got into rehearsal, the structure of the book was never changed. But we made enormous changes within that structure. We changed a lot of the score. We changed a lot of the book. The original number, the opening number Tradition, was written after Jerry joined the project, because Jerry kept talking. We had lots of meetings in preparation for it. And Jerry kept asking the very simple, what is this story about? Yeah. And we'd say, well, it's about this man who has these 3 marriageable daughters, and he's having difficulty with each one. He says, I know that. I know the story, but what's it about? Why are we writing it? And the word tradition kept coming up. He says, well, this daughter's breaking the tradition by marrying without a matchmaker, and it's a tradition for them to have a matchmaker. And of course, it's a terrible tradition when she marries out of the faith. He says, then why don't we say that it's about that? At some point, somebody said, we said, well, let's write a tradition. And that's when we wrote the opening number, and we all became comfortable about what we were saying, because we were telling the audience what they were about to see.
Yeah.
Tradition, 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 tradition.
Yeah, it's amazing to think that came last. But
it came
really
last.
Is the distillation
it really did.
of...
It was all there, but it came last, and it taught me an enormous lesson. Tell the audience what you're doing, so that they can be comfortable and relax.
Yeah. What are other things that you think it's important for a good book for a musical to have?
Well, I think there are certain elements of a good book to me. One is, first of all, of course, you have to have something to say that is important to you. Essentially, most of the stuff I write has something in common, and that's without my thinking about it. And looking back, they're all about, every one of those of my shows, substantially, are about simple people, ordinary people, I don't write about very sophisticated people.
Yeah.
I don't write Noel Coward kind of people. I'm not that I have anything against them. I just don't know them that well. Yeah, but in Plain and Fancy, I write about the Pennsylvania Dutch. In The Baker's Wife, I write about the simple French peasants. In Juno, it's the Irish, the poor Irish of Dublin.
You've hit almost every immigrant group.
Yeah, and it's always about the conflict of cultures, which I didn't realize while I was writing them, but almost every one of them has that strain of the conflict of cultures. It's surely true of Plain and Fancy, my very first. It's true of Juno. It's true of The Baker's Wife. It's true of all of them. So you have to have something to say, even if you don't know you're saying it. I mean, you have to be basically, you have to be very clear about what you're saying. Secondly, I think it's very important to have a story that you can sing about. That has a larger-than-life quality and a larger-than-life central character. Somebody who is larger than life in one way or another.
You want to spend 2 hours with them.
Somebody to spend 2 hours with and somebody who can dominate a stage. But I don't think there's any rules that can't be broken.
Yeah.
But those are the things I find are the tools that are most comfortable to my hands.
Yeah. Well, Fiddler breaks a ton of rules. There's no showgirls in that show. It's not your typical musical theater musical.
The rules I broke very early in my career
was
a simple thing called Mr. Wonderful. I think it was the first integrated chorus.
Really?
We ever had. Because we had Sammy Davis was a black star,
right,
and his girlfriend was black, but everybody else originally was all white. And I remember having a big fight with the director. And the chorus is the community in which the central character lives. And you can't ask Sammy to be living in an all-white community. It just doesn't make sense. He says, well, those are the best dancers and singers. I said, are you saying that there are no good black singers and dancers? He says, well, no, we auditioned them all. I said, maybe we should call Sammy and tell him that that you have an all-white chorus. And the producer, a very well-known composer named Julie Stein, and he was saying, Joe, for Christ's sake, what are you arguing about? He says, they auditioned, they got a great chorus. He said, I'll call Sammy, and I'll never forget this conversation. I was sitting there, and Julie says, listen, Sammy, we just went over the thing. We got a great cast. They're coming together very well. The book is in good shape, and I love the score. And incidentally, the chorus happens to be all white, but otherwise everything. Well, it's just that. How many? 4. How about? And then he turns to the director, who was also a choreographer. He says, "What the fuck's the matter with you?" He says, "Of course we have to have an integrated orchestra." I will never forget that instant in my life because it was so funny. And Julia, who was an adorable man, I loved him. He turned around like he became a different person. He said, how can you do it? How can you even think that way?
Yes, Sammy Davis was the first time you wrote a musical with someone in mind, correct?
Well, it was the first and only time that I wrote a musical where we were committed. We were really writing a musical for Sammy Davis. We weren't writing a musical about anything that we wanted. In other words, it was basically a commercial enterprise.
Right.
I had fun in doing it, and I loved Sammy, but it was not the most attractive thing for me to do.
What does that entail? What does that mean to write a song for Sammy Davis, as opposed to just writing?
Well, it was like he wanted a part of his real act within the show.
Huh.
So it was like written to order.
Yeah.
So obviously it required my building a story about a young kid who's trying to break into show business. And in other words, the story almost dictated itself. And we had a lot of fun with it, and it was a joy to work with Sammy because his talent was just endless.
Yeah.
And by the way, that was the first time I met Jerry Park, because Jerry was the composer.
Really?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I recommended Jerry to work with Sheldon.
That's quite a match you've made.
Yeah. So at any rate, I mean, it had its values, but it was not my favorite kind of writing, to write for a character, and I never did it again, ever. But it was fun.
Yeah.
It was not like, writing Zorba.
Right. Well, let's talk about Zorba. I mean, that's we first met at the Mufti stages when they were remounted that production.
You mean at New York?
Yeah.
Zorba came about because Herschel Bernardi was playing Tevye. And Herschel Bernardi was in love with a novel, Zorba the Greek. And he thought it would make a great musical. And I read the novel, I saw the movie, and I thought it was the kind of thing that appeals to me very much. Those people, those tough Greek peasants who are trying to struggle for a living, they touch me. And the central character, God knows, is larger than life. He has great humor, and he has a point of view with which I absolutely agree. Our producer was Hal Prince, and Hal was very close to Ken Renette, whom I didn't know, but I admired their work. And he said, "How about them?" I said, "Oh God, I'd love to work with John and Fred." And I think Zorba is one of the absolutely best scores that they wrote or has written. It's a glorious score.
One of my favorite moments in that score is "Happy Birthday to Me." How did you guys find that incredible moment?
It's a brilliant song.
Yeah.
I also think their love song is one of the most beautiful songs. Love, give me love, only love. That's all.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so simple. It's got the simplicity of, I don't know, every Berlin had that simplicity.
Right.
And it's enormously moving and effective. And I told them so.
Good.
No.
Yeah.
Also, I'll tell you, it's maybe too serious to be popular. I don't know. Because I never know anything about what's going to be popular or what isn't. I learned from Fiddler, don't try to outguess the audience.
Right.
But at any rate, working with John and Fred was, actually, I don't think I've ever had a really difficult experience with any of my collaborators.
What do you attribute that to? What do you think?
Well, I think that
you hear horror stories.
First of all, I worked with very talented people. I mean, these were not novices, because they were all professionals and seasoned and sure of themselves, were very easy to criticize, to talk to collaborate, really. Every one of the people I've mentioned. But also, we never started a project without our total agreement on what this show is about.
Yeah.
Always. And if you don't have that, you're going to have a lot of trouble. But with these guys, in every case, we saw eye to eye from the very beginning.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about Rags, which
Well, don't be remiss. You just asked.
Well, I mean, it is, when I talk about Broadway musicals with any of my friends who have been around, they say, well, you had to have seen Rags. It is really talked about.
Well, I agree with your friends.
It's greatly admired.
I really love that show. I'm very sad about that show because it had a great score, not just a good score, a really great score that Charles and Stephen wrote. And I think, if I say so myself, it's a very solid book, and it's a very worthwhile story to tell. The reason I wrote it actually is because I was constantly being urged to write a Fiddler 2, son of Fiddler.
Legend of Tevye's Gold.
Son of Fiddler, the follow-up of Fiddler. What happened to this family when they came to America, and so on. And I said, I've told the story of this family, but the idea of telling the story of the American immigrant, the immigrant to New York, was again something that I couldn't get out of my mind. And so I decided to write Rags. I didn't know whether I would write it for the screen or for the stage. I prefer to write it for the stage. Originally, I was thinking somebody from the coast suggested I write it for the screen. Actually, I am uncomfortable writing for the screen because, as you know, the authority on films is not the writer. He's a fairly low man on the totem pole, and if he's lucky, he's the middle man on the totem pole. Right. But, thank God with the Guild in the theater, we have control. So the only things I've written for films are 2 films based on my own work, where I had complete control of the script. I did the Fiddler's script, and I did the script for the film Event of Laughing. But otherwise, I've been asked to write movies from time to time, and I've always said no. For that reason, I just like writing for the feeling that is my baby. I've got enough in-laws without the movies. So, where are we now?
Well, we're in Rags, and it's interesting because it's really it's a beloved.
Yeah, I thought it was a wonderful show. I loved it. Unfortunately, although we got mixed reviews and fairly good reviews, we got one really bad reviews, and that was the Times. Mm-hmm. And our producers had no backup. They didn't have enough funds to go on, and we didn't have much of an advance, so they abruptly closed it. It was a kind of a sensational closing, because I don't know whether you know this, but when they put up the closing notice, the cast at the end of that last show marched down Broadway with signs saying "Keep Rags Open." Really? Yeah. As a matter of fact, I only found out about it. Elise and I were out of town, and I was watching television that night in a strange little hotel, and I see the cast of my shows walking up and down Broadway. They were so in love with that show. They, as much as we the writers. And of course, the producer called me that night and said, "Did you see that? We're going to keep it open." That was Sunday night. And Monday morning, they said, "We haven't got the money."
Wow. How do you shake it off? I mean, you spend several years of your life writing a show. One bad review sinks you. How do you dust yourself off and keep going?
Listen, you've heard the word depression?
Yeah.
No. That's what happens. You go into this depression that may last very briefly, maybe only 5 years. No, but really, actually, if you have any self-control and interest in the work, after a while it wears off. You feel that you've had an unhappy experience, but you have a lovely show that's someday will be done. And we feel someday it will be done. I mean, look at what happened to Enter Laughing.
Yeah. Well, that brings us perfectly to Enter Laughing, which is enjoying this amazing new life.
Well, Enter Laughing, but I'll tell you how it happened. Carl Reiner wrote this book, which is kind of remotely autobiographical, but it was about his entrance into show business. And I said, my experience was not identical, but there were similarities to my getting involved in show business. I was very taken with that book. It's not a great piece of literature, but it was very honest. And I said, I'd like to make a play out of it. He says, be my guest, basically. And to my delight, it was very successful as a play. Some years later, I thought of doing it, musicalizing it, and it was a big failure. And the reason why it was a failure is because the producer insisted upon a star to play this 18-year-old kid, and there are no 18-year-old stars. So he had Bobby Morse, who was then in his 40s, playing the kids. So the only way I could do it, it could be done when I did as a flashback. In other words, we had this grown man opening up and telling a biographer, a newspaper man, about his early days trying to break into the theater. So he had 2 hours of a 40-odd-year-old man making love to an 18-year-old girl.
Oh my God.
And, you know, who's going to believe that? And I don't blame the audience for saying, come on. It had some wonderful moments, had a lot of funny stuff, much of which was on the stage later. But it was not the original musical we wrote. We didn't write it for a 40-year-old man. Anyway, so it didn't last. And it was gathering dust in the room next door when the York Theater decided to do 7 or 8 of my plays. One of which they wanted to do Enter Laughing. And I said, I don't know. I haven't seen it for a long time. Anyway, I said, what the hell? You know, let's try it. And I did a lot of rewrite, and we have a new show.
Yeah.
And it was enormously successful. And the thing about that, by the way, is it proves something I've always felt about the theater. It's a living theater. It's a living art. Nothing is really dead. If it's lying in your drawer, it's just breathing. It's waiting to be awakened. And you can fool around with it, you can play with it later. And you can't do that with a movie. You can't do that with a novel. You can only do it with a play. As a matter of fact, Fiddler, last time it's been running for like 40 or 35 years or something. When it was recently revived, I changed a couple of lines. Where else can you do that?
Right.
But Enter Laughing, I changed much more than a couple of lines. I changed quite a bit. And we had what amounts to, although it was a small non-profit theater, we had a runaway hit. And that's life in the theater.
I saw that I had like 6 missed calls, so something's happened.
Who won the Pulitzer Prize?
A finalist. I'm pretty sure I didn't win it, but I think I'm a finalist.
Find out.
Hi, so wait, we're a Pulitzer finalist? Wow, I am at Joe Stein's house.
Wow. Fiddler never won the Pulitzer.
Yeah, but Fiddler won the hearts of millions.